Last October, I drove home from my cousin's wedding in Ohio, which was about 6 hours from where I live. I want to say up front that I'm the type of person who hates spending money on things I consider unnecessary, and a hotel room for one night just to sleep for 6 hours felt like a waste to me. My girlfriend at the time, Erin, called me an idiot for that logic more than once, and looking back, she was right, but I've never been great at listening to good advice when it's inconvenient. The reception ran longer than I expected, and by the time I said my goodbyes and got in the car, it was already past 10 at night. Erin had wanted to come with me to the wedding, but she had an early shift at the hospital the next morning, so I made the drive by myself. I remember telling her on the phone before I left that I'd call her when I stopped for gas, just so she'd know I was still alive and moving. She told me to be safe and to actually stop if I got tired, which, in hindsight, is advice I did not follow very well. The first 2 hours were completely normal. I had the radio on low, windows cracked just enough to keep me from getting drowsy, and I was making decent time. I stopped once around midnight for gas and a coffee I didn't really want but bought anyway because I figured the caffeine would help. I called Erin like I promised. She was already half asleep, and we only talked for a couple of minutes before she told me she loved me and hung up. After that stop, the road changed. I got onto a stretch of highway that cut through farmland. The kind of road where you can drive for 20 minutes without seeing another car, another light, anything except your own headlights and whatever the moon decides to show you. I didn't think much of it at the time. I'd driven through plenty of rural nothing before, and honestly, I kind of liked it. It felt peaceful compared to the noise of the wedding. About 40 minutes into that stretch, I passed a water tower. It was one of those old rusted ones, the kind that has some town's name painted on the side. Half the letters faded out so you can only make out a few of them. I only really noticed it because the moon caught the metal just right and it looked, for a second, like a giant standing out in the middle of a field. I actually thought that was kind of a cool visual, and I remember thinking I should tell Erin about it in the morning. Maybe 15 minutes later, I saw it again. I want to be honest and say my first reaction wasn't fear. It was just mild confusion, the kind where you assume you're wrong about something small. I told myself that small towns out here probably build the same handful of structures, water towers included, so it wasn't crazy that two of them would look almost identical. I didn't slow down. I didn't really think about it again until a few minutes later when I passed a gas station that was shut down for the night, a busted sign out front that just said, "You yell," because the F had fallen off at some point. I remembered seeing that sign already. That's when my stomach started doing that thing where it feels like it's folding in on itself. I actually said out loud, to nobody, "Okay, that's weird," just to hear a voice in the car that wasn't the radio. I turned the radio down, like that would help me think clearer, which is a stupid habit I have. I pulled over onto the shoulder and just sat there for a minute trying to talk myself down from being dramatic. I hadn't slept much the night before the wedding, and I'd had 2 glasses of wine at the reception, hours earlier, sure, but I started wondering if that was still messing with me more than I wanted to admit. I grabbed my phone to pull up a map, and I had no service. Not weak service, not one bar. It just said, SOS only. In the corner, which is a phrase that has never once made me feel better in my entire life. I decided the smart move was to keep driving and pay close attention, in case I'd missed a fork in the road somewhere without realizing it. Roads like this sometimes split without much warning. I told myself that had to be the explanation, because the alternative wasn't something I wanted to sit with on an empty highway by myself. I started driving again, slower this time, watching every mile marker like it owed me an explanation. About 10 minutes later, I passed the water tower a third time. I actually laughed, but it wasn't a real laugh. It was one of those laughs that comes out when your body doesn't know what else to do with itself. I pulled over again. My hands were shaking a little on the wheel, and I remembered gripping it tighter just to make them stop. I checked the gas gauge. It was sitting just under a quarter tank, which shouldn't have bothered me on a normal night, but on a road that apparently didn't want to let me leave. It felt like watching a clock count down. I tried calling Erin. Nothing. I tried texting her instead, just typing out, "Hey, this is going to sound crazy, but I think I'm lost. Call me when you wake up," figuring maybe it would send once I found a pocket of signal. The little red exclamation mark popped up next to it instead. Failed to send. I got out of the car, mostly because sitting still felt worse than standing outside in the cold. The night was quiet in a way that I still don't have great words for. No crickets. No wind moving through the fields. I've camped before. I've been out in genuinely remote places, and there's always some kind of background noise, even if it's small. This was nothing. It was the kind of quiet that makes you very aware of your own breathing. I got back in the car and decided I was going to turn around and drive back toward the wedding venue instead of continuing forward. It felt better to end up somewhere familiar than to keep pushing into whatever this was. I did a 3-point turn in the middle of the empty road, which felt illegal even though there was nobody around to care, and started heading back the way I came. For about 10 minutes, everything felt normal again. No water tower. No broken gas station sign. My heart rate actually started to come down, and I remember thinking, okay, I was just tired, I was just stressed from the wedding, this is what exhaustion does to people. Then I saw the water tower again, except this time it was on my left side instead of my right. I need you to understand how impossible that felt in the moment. I hadn't turned anywhere. I hadn't taken a side road. I was on the same straight stretch of highway, driving the opposite direction from before, and the same exact landmark was suddenly on the wrong side of my car. I pulled over a third time and just sat there gripping the wheel, trying to breathe through my nose because I read somewhere that helps with panic. I tried to think of a logical explanation. Maybe there were 2 identical water towers on either side of some junction I kept missing in the dark. Maybe the road curved somewhere in a way that was messing with my sense of direction, since it was so flat and featureless out there. I wanted so badly to believe either of those things. I checked the gas gauge again. It had dropped more than it should have for the amount of driving I'd actually done. I know cars run a little inefficient sometimes, but this felt wrong, like the needle was falling faster than the miles on the odometer could account for. I had 2 options as far as I could tell. Keep driving and hope I broke whatever pattern I was stuck in, or pull over and just wait until sunrise so I could actually see the landscape and figure out what was going on. Sitting still in the dark scared me more than driving did, so I kept going. About 20 minutes later, my headlights caught something on the shoulder up ahead. At first I thought it was a deer, low to the ground and still, but as I got closer I realized it was a person, crouched down like they were tying their shoe, facing away from the road. I slowed down out of instinct more than anything, the way you do for anyone who might need help. But something about how still they were made every part of me want to speed past instead of stop, so I did. I drove by slow enough to get a real look, maybe a second and a half, no more than that, and they didn't move at all. Not a flinch, not a turn of the head. In that second and a half, I swear I recognized the jacket on their back. Navy blue with a small tear near the left shoulder, the exact one I'd caught on a nail years ago and never got around to fixing. I didn't stop to check. I pressed the gas down and didn't look at my mirror for a long time after that. The gas gauge kept dropping in a way that didn't match my speed, and by the time the sky finally started turning gray at the edges, I was running on fumes, the little orange warning light glowing on the dashboard like it had been waiting all night for its turn to bother me. Right as the sun properly came up, the road curved for the first time all night. A real curve, not just an endless straight line. Up ahead was an actual intersection, a stop sign, and a diner with its lights on. I don't think I've ever felt relief like that in my whole life. I pulled into the gravel lot on fumes, the engine sputtering as I put it in park, and I just sat there for a second before I could make myself get out. Inside, the waitress asked if I was doing okay, because apparently I looked like I'd seen a ghost, her words, not mine. I asked her what town I was in, and when she told me, it wasn't anywhere near where I thought I'd been driving. My phone finally had service again, and according to it, I was almost 40 miles off the route I should have taken, on a road my GPS barely had any data for at all. The diner owner kept a gas can for stranded drivers, and I paid him double what it was worth just out of pure gratitude. I called Erin the second I had signal, and she picked up on the first ring, already panicking because she'd woken up to my unsent text somehow finally coming through at 5 in the morning. I drove the rest of the way home in full daylight without a single problem. I never saw that water tower again. I never found that stretch of road on any map afterward, not that town, not that gas station with the broken sign. The only thing I still can't explain is that when I got home and hung my jacket up in the closet, the tear near the shoulder was gone. Not sewn up. Not patched over. Just gone, like it had never been there. The first thing that made me realize something was wrong was seeing my own headlights coming toward me. I was driving alone on a 2-lane highway somewhere in western Pennsylvania, and there wasn't supposed to be another car anywhere near me. I had been on that road for almost an hour without seeing anyone. Then, around 2 in the morning, headlights appeared around a bend ahead of me. At first, I assumed it was another driver coming the opposite direction. Then I realized the headlights were on my side of the road. I slowed down immediately. The other vehicle didn't. It stayed in my lane, coming directly toward me. I moved onto the shoulder and slammed on my brakes. The car passed me without slowing down. For a second, I thought I had somehow imagined the whole thing. Then I looked in my rearview mirror. The car was behind me. I could see its headlights, and it was driving in the same direction as me. I don't know how to explain that without making it sound more dramatic than it was. Maybe I was exhausted. Maybe the curve in the road had made me misjudge where the car was. There was probably some normal explanation. That was what I told myself anyway. I was driving home from visiting my cousin. I had stayed later than I planned, and by the time I left, I knew I was going to be driving most of the night. Normally, I wouldn't have cared. I actually liked driving at night. There was less traffic, fewer distractions, and I could just listen to music and think. That night was different, though. The highway was almost completely empty. There were stretches where I couldn't see a single house or business, just trees on both sides of the road. My phone had been sitting in the cup holder because I was using it for directions, but the signal kept coming and going. I wasn't worried about it because I knew the route. After the car appeared behind me, I checked the rearview mirror every few seconds. It was still there. It wasn't following closely. It stayed maybe 100 yards behind me. I slowed down a little. It slowed down too. I sped up. It sped up. That was when I started getting uncomfortable. I didn't want to assume someone was following me just because they happened to be driving the same highway. That happens all the time. So I changed my speed again. The car matched me. I decided to take the next exit and stop somewhere. A few minutes later, I saw a green sign for a gas station and motel at the next exit. I took it. The car behind me took it too. I remember feeling my stomach drop when I saw the headlights turn off the highway behind me. There was only one reason I could think of for someone following me off the highway. Maybe they needed gas. Maybe they were just going the same direction. Maybe I was overthinking everything. The road after the exit was almost completely dark. There were no streetlights. I drove for another minute before seeing the gas station ahead. The parking lot was almost empty. There was one pickup truck parked beside the building, but I couldn't see anyone inside it. I pulled up to a pump. The car behind me drove past. I watched it in my mirror. It didn't stop. It continued down the road. I felt stupid. I actually laughed to myself. I had spent the last 10 minutes convincing myself I was being followed, and the person had simply been going somewhere else. I got out and started pumping gas. That's when I noticed the pickup truck. It was parked facing me. The driver's window was down. There was someone sitting behind the wheel. I couldn't see his face clearly because the interior was dark. I tried not to stare. I finished getting gas, put the nozzle back, and got into my car. As I started the engine, the pickup's headlights came on. I waited. The truck didn't move. I pulled out of the parking lot. The truck pulled out behind me. At that point, I was done pretending it was a coincidence. I drove back toward the highway. The truck followed. I looked for a place with other people around, but there wasn't much. Then I remembered the motel sign. It was back near the gas station. I considered turning around and going inside the motel lobby. There would at least be cameras and people there. But before I could make the decision, the truck suddenly turned onto a side road. I continued toward the highway. I watched it disappear in my mirror. I felt relieved. I got back onto the highway and continued driving. For the next 20 minutes, nothing happened. I started calming down. I even called myself an idiot for getting so paranoid. Then I saw the pickup again. It was parked on the shoulder ahead of me. No hazard lights, no headlights. Just sitting there, I passed it. As soon as I did, the truck pulled onto the highway behind me. I didn't look at it again. I just drove. A few minutes later, I saw another exit. This one had a small diner listed on the sign. I took it. The truck followed. I was getting genuinely scared now. The diner was closed, but there was a 24-hour convenience store next door. I pulled into the parking lot and parked directly underneath the brightest light I could find. There were 2 cars parked outside. I could see someone behind the counter inside the store. The pickup pulled into the lot. It parked near the entrance. I didn't get out. The man inside the truck didn't get out either. We just sat there. I called the store from my phone. A woman answered. I told her I was outside and asked if there were any other customers inside. She said there were 2. I asked her if she could see the pickup truck outside. There was a pause. Then she said, "Yeah, I asked her if the person inside it had come into the store." She said no. I told her I thought the person might be following me. She didn't laugh. She told me to come inside and she'd lock the door behind me. I thanked her. I was about to get out when the pickup suddenly backed out of its parking spot. It drove toward the exit. I watched it leave. I waited another minute. Then I got out and went inside. The woman behind the counter locked the door as soon as I entered. There were 2 other customers sitting near the windows. I explained what had happened. One of the men looked outside and said, "I think that truck is parked across the road." I looked through the window. He was right. The pickup was sitting on the opposite side of the road with its lights off. The woman told me I should call the police. I agreed. I stepped outside the store's entrance, but before I could make the call, the pickup's headlights turned on. It pulled onto the road. Then it stopped. The truck was facing the store. Nobody moved. I called emergency services and explained where I was. They told me someone would come. I went back inside. The woman kept watching the truck through the window. About 10 minutes later, we saw police lights coming down the road. The pickup immediately drove away. I watched it disappear around the corner. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. The officer asked me to describe the truck and driver. I told him everything I could remember. He took my information and told me they would check the surrounding roads. Then he said something that still bothers me. He told me they had received a call about a vehicle matching that description earlier that night. Apparently, someone had reported a pickup driving slowly behind them on the same highway. But that wasn't the strange part. The officer told me the other driver had reported seeing the pickup parked on the shoulder. They said there was nobody inside. I asked him what he meant. He said the person who called had driven past the truck, and when they looked in their mirror, they claimed the pickup had somehow disappeared. I laughed because I thought he was joking. He wasn't. He said the call sounded strange, but they had written it down anyway. The officer eventually told me I was free to go. I didn't want to drive anymore, but I still had several hours left before I got home. I considered getting a room. Instead, I stayed on the highway. For the rest of the drive, I didn't see the pickup. I finally reached my town just after sunrise. I pulled into my driveway and sat in my car for a few minutes before going inside. I was exhausted. I wanted to forget the whole thing. A few days later, I received a call from the officer. They had found the pickup. It was abandoned in a wooded area about 20 miles from the convenience store. There was no one inside. The license plate had been removed. The officer told me they couldn't connect it to the person who had been following me. They also couldn't explain why the same vehicle had been reported by another driver earlier that night. I asked if they found anything inside. He said there wasn't much. An empty water bottle, a blanket, some old clothes, and a printed map. He said the map had several roads circled in red. One of those roads was the highway I had been driving on. I asked him if my name was anywhere on the map. He said no. That should have made me feel better. It didn't. I haven't driven that highway at night since. Actually, I avoid driving alone at night whenever I can. The part that still bothers me isn't the truck. It's something I noticed after the officer called. I went back through the photos on my phone from that night. I had taken one picture of the road while I was sitting at the convenience store. It was a stupid picture. I had taken it because I wanted to remember the location in case I needed to explain it to the police. The picture showed the road outside the store. The pickup wasn't in it. That made sense because I had taken the picture before the truck turned its headlights on. But there was something else in the picture. Something I hadn't noticed before. On the far side of the road behind the trees, there was another vehicle. It was parked facing the highway. It looked exactly like the pickup. Same shape, same dark color, same front end, and the driver's door was open. I zoomed in as much as I could. There was someone standing beside it. I couldn't see the person's face, but I could see that they were looking directly toward the convenience store. Toward me. I deleted the picture. I don't know why. Maybe because I didn't want to keep looking at it. Maybe because I didn't want to admit that I had missed something that obvious while I was standing there. Or maybe because, for a few seconds, I had the uncomfortable feeling that whoever had been following me that night wasn't actually trying to catch me. Maybe they were making sure I kept driving, and I still don't know where they wanted me to go. About 8 months ago, I bought a used car from a guy off Facebook Marketplace, a decent little sedan with low miles for the price, and the only weird thing about the whole deal was that it came with a dash cam already installed, mounted right behind the rearview mirror. The seller told me it just came with the car when he bought it, used himself, and he never bothered taking it out because it worked fine and he figured it might be useful for insurance purposes. I didn't think much of it. Free dash cam, more or less, so I kept it running. I work a closing shift at a restaurant a few nights a week, which means I'm usually driving home somewhere between midnight and 1 in the morning, depending on how bad cleanup is. My route home takes me down a long stretch of state road that cuts through mostly farmland and a couple of small subdivisions before I hit my actual neighborhood. I've made that drive probably 100 times without anything strange happening. The first time I noticed anything off, I wasn't even looking for it. I was reviewing some dashcam footage a few weeks after buying the car because I'd gotten a little too close to another driver merging onto the highway, and I wanted to check if I needed the clip for insurance in case they tried to claim I hit them. I didn't, thankfully, but while I was scrubbing through the footage from that night, I noticed something in a completely unrelated clip from a few days earlier. In the footage, I was driving down that same stretch of state road, alone, no other headlights around, which matched my memory of that night perfectly. But in the corner of the frame, on the passenger side, there was a shape standing just off the shoulder of the road. Tall, mostly still, kind of blurred out from the low light and the low resolution of the camera. I remember watching that clip a few times, zooming in as much as the app would let me, trying to convince myself it was just a mailbox or a fence post catching the headlights weird. Here's the thing though, I remembered that specific drive. I remembered it clearly because nothing had happened. There was no shape on the side of the road that I'd noticed. I would have seen something like that with my own eyes, especially something tall enough to be a person, especially on a road that dark and empty. I hadn't seen a thing. I decided I was probably overthinking a low-quality video and moved on with my life for a little while. I didn't stop using the dash cam, but I also didn't go looking through old footage again for a few weeks. Then one night, driving home from my closing shift, something made me glance at the little screen on the dash cam itself, which shows a live preview of what it's recording. I don't usually look at it while driving, obviously, but something out of the corner of my eye caught my attention. On the little screen, in the reflection it was capturing through my windshield, there was a figure standing directly in the middle of the road up ahead. I slammed on my brakes so hard my tires screeched, my heart absolutely pounding, and I looked up through the actual windshield expecting to see someone standing there in real life. There was nothing. The road ahead was completely empty. I sat there for a solid minute with my hazards on, my hands shaking, staring back and forth between the empty road in front of me and the little dashcam screen, which was now just showing the same empty road I could see with my own eyes. Whatever had been on that screen a second earlier was gone, if it had ever really been there at all. I told myself it had to be some kind of glitch, a reflection off the windshield from my own headlights bouncing weird off the screen, maybe a bug that flew close to the lens. I have a logical brain, and logical explanations usually win out over anything else in my head. I started driving again, slower this time, watching the road ahead of me very closely instead of the dashcam screen. About 10 minutes later, I got home safe. Nothing else happened that night, and I told myself I'd imagined it or misread some strange lighting effect. I almost convinced myself of that completely, until I got home and, out of curiosity I couldn't really explain, pulled up that night's footage before I even took my shoes off. The footage from the actual road, the real recorded video, showed nothing unusual. Empty road, my headlights, the usual shaky quality from the dash cam stabilization, no figure standing in the middle of the road. No sign of anything I'd seen reflected on that little live preview screen. That should have made me feel better. Instead, it made everything so much worse because it meant whatever I'd seen wasn't even being recorded. It was only showing up live in that split second on a screen that was supposed to just be mirroring what the camera was capturing in real time. I stopped using the dashcam's live preview after that. I just let it record without looking at the little screen, which felt like a reasonable compromise between being safe and not completely spiraling into paranoia over what was probably nothing. About 3 weeks later, I was driving home again, same road, same time of night, and my GPS app on my phone, which was mounted on my dashboard giving me directions I honestly didn't need since I'd driven this route hundreds of times, did something I'd never seen it do before. The little blue dot representing my car froze in place on the map, even though I was clearly still moving, still driving forward at a steady 50 miles an hour. I glanced at it a few times, annoyed more than scared at first, assuming it was just a GPS signal issue from being out in a rural area. But then the map itself started to change. Not glitch exactly, more like it was rendering something that hadn't been there before. A road appeared on the screen that didn't exist in real life, a thin gray line branching off from the road I was actually on, leading off into an area that, as far as I knew, was just empty farmland. I looked up from my phone at the actual road ahead of me, and for a split second, just a split second, I swear I saw the headlights of my car illuminate a break in the tree line up ahead, like the entrance to a dirt road that I had genuinely never noticed on this route before, despite driving it constantly for years. I did not turn onto it. Every instinct in my body told me not to touch that gap in the trees, GPS or no GPS. I kept driving straight, gripping the wheel hard enough that my knuckles ached a little afterward, and when I glanced at my phone again a few seconds later, the little blue dot was moving normally again, and the fake road, or whatever it had been, was gone from the map entirely. Just the normal route home, exactly like it should have looked the whole time. I got home that night and immediately went back through the actual footage on the dashcam again. There was no break in the tree line, no gap, no dirt road, nothing. Just a solid stretch of trees along the shoulder, exactly the way I remembered it looking for years before that night. I want to tell you, I threw the dashcam away after that, or took it out of the car, or at least stopped using that road at night. But the truth is, I didn't do any of those things right away. I think some part of me needed to understand what was happening more than I was scared of it, which, in hindsight, was a pretty stupid way to think. The last time anything happened, I was almost home, less than 5 minutes from my driveway, driving down a much more familiar residential stretch with actual streetlights and houses on either side. I glanced at the dashcam's live screen out of habit, forgetting I'd told myself not to do that anymore, and for just a moment, less than a second, the screen showed my own back seat instead of the road ahead. Sitting in the back seat, in that brief flash on the little screen, was a shape that looked like it was leaning forward toward the front of the car, toward me, even though when I looked in my actual rearview mirror at the actual back seat, there was nothing there at all. Just my gym bag and an empty water bottle rolling around on the floor. I pulled the dashcam off the windshield mount the second I got into my driveway, before I even put the car in park properly, and I threw it into a drawer in my garage where it still sits today. I haven't turned it back on since, and I haven't looked at any of the old footage again either, because some part of me is scared that if I keep watching closely enough, I'll eventually see something on that little screen that doesn't disappear when I look up at the real road in front of me. I still drive that same route home most nights, because I don't really have another option, but I don't have a dashcam anymore, and honestly, I think I'd rather not know what it might catch. I first noticed the car because it passed me 3 times. That probably doesn't sound scary by itself, but this was a road where there was basically nowhere for another car to go. It was a long stretch of highway through the mountains, and for most of the drive, I was the only person on it. The first time it passed me, I didn't think anything of it. It was a dark SUV with one headlight that looked slightly dimmer than the other. I remember that detail because I had to slow down when it came around me. It passed quickly and disappeared around the next bend. A few minutes later, I passed it. It was parked on the shoulder. I assumed the driver had pulled over for some reason. I kept going. About 10 minutes later, the same SUV passed me again. I knew it was the same one because of the headlight, and that's when I started paying attention. This happened a couple of years ago when I was driving home from visiting my sister. She lived several states away, and I had stayed longer than I planned because we hadn't seen each other in almost a year. I had work the next morning, so I left late, much later than I should have. It was already after midnight when I got onto the highway. I wasn't particularly tired yet. I had coffee in the cup holder, music playing, and I knew the route well enough that I didn't need to constantly look at my phone. The highway eventually narrowed down to one lane in each direction. There were no streetlights, no businesses, just trees and mountains. I had driven that stretch during the day before, so I knew there were occasional pull-offs where people could stop if they needed to. At night, though, everything looked different. The first time the SUV passed me, I didn't even see the driver. The windows were tinted almost completely black. I continued driving. Then I noticed it parked on the shoulder. I remember thinking that whoever was driving it had either run out of gas or needed to make a phone call. I didn't stop. A few minutes later, I saw headlights behind me. I assumed it was another vehicle. Then it passed. It was the same SUV. I watched it disappear around the curve. I started feeling slightly uneasy. There was no way I could prove anything strange was happening. Maybe the driver had pulled over, then gotten back on the road. Maybe I had simply forgotten how far ahead of me it had been. I let it go. About 15 minutes later, I saw the SUV again. This time, it was parked in another pull-off. I slowed down slightly as I passed. There was nobody standing outside. The driver's window was down. That bothered me for some reason. I could see the empty driver's seat through the window. I kept going. Then, about 10 minutes later, the SUV appeared behind me again. I checked my rearview mirror. It was close enough that I could see the front grille. I started getting nervous. I sped up. So did it. I slowed down. It stayed behind me. I considered pulling over and letting it pass, but I didn't want to stop on an empty mountain road in the middle of the night. So I kept driving. Then something happened that made me realize I wasn't imagining the situation. The SUV's headlights suddenly disappeared, not gradually. They just turned off. I could still see the outline of the vehicle in my mirror because of my own headlights reflecting off it. It continued following me without its lights on. I stared at my mirror. My heart started beating harder. There was no reason to drive without headlights on that road. I reached for my phone. I wanted to call someone, but I had almost no service. I decided I would drive until I reached the next town. It was maybe 20 miles away. I could make it. I just had to keep going. The SUV stayed behind me. Then I saw something ahead. A gas station. It was one of those old highway stations that stayed open all night. I immediately decided to pull in. As soon as I turned into the parking lot, the SUV drove past. I watched it continue down the highway. I parked directly in front of the building. There were 2 employees inside. I got out and went in. The guy behind the counter looked at me and asked if I needed help. I told him I was just getting something to drink. I didn't want to explain what had happened. I bought a bottle of water and stood near the counter for a few minutes. The other employee was cleaning something behind the register. I kept looking through the windows. The SUV never came back. Eventually, I started feeling stupid again. Maybe I had been overreacting. I went back outside. That's when I noticed the SUV. It was parked behind the gas station. I could see just the front end sticking out from behind the building. I froze. I hadn't seen it drive back. There was no entrance behind the building that I knew of. I went back inside. The cashier noticed my expression. He asked if everything was okay. I pointed toward the SUV. I told him I thought the person driving it had been following me. He looked through the window. Then he looked back at me. He didn't seem surprised. He just said, "Don't go outside." I asked him why. He told me the SUV had been parked back there before I arrived. I asked him how long it had been there. He said he didn't know. Then he told me something that made my stomach drop. He said he hadn't seen anyone get out of it. I asked if he could call the police. He said he could. Before he could reach for the phone, the lights inside the store flickered. The employee behind the counter looked toward the back room. Then we heard something hit the side of the building. It sounded like metal scraping against concrete. Nobody spoke. The cashier walked toward the window. I grabbed his arm and told him not to go closer. He stopped. We stood there listening. Nothing happened for several seconds. Then there was another sound, This time it sounded like someone knocking on the back door. 3 slow knocks. The employee who had been cleaning walked toward the back. The cashier immediately told him not to open it. The knocking stopped. Then it started again. 3 knocks. Exactly the same. I asked if there was another exit. The cashier said there was a front door and an employee door in the back. I told him we should lock both. He nodded. The 3 of us moved away from the windows. I called emergency services. This time, I had enough signal. I explained what was happening. They told me officers were on the way. The knocking continued. Then it stopped. We waited. Nothing. A few minutes later, headlights appeared on the highway. I thought it was the police. But the vehicle passed the station without turning in. It was the SUV. Its headlights were on now. It slowed down as it passed. Then it disappeared. The cashier looked at me and said, "That's not the first time." I asked what he meant. He told me that over the past few weeks, several people had complained about a dark SUV stopping near the station at night. Nobody knew who owned it. Nobody had ever gotten a clear look at the driver. I asked why the police hadn't done anything. He said they had. Apparently, every time officers arrived, the SUV was gone. Then the police finally arrived. I told them everything. They checked the property and drove down the highway looking for the SUV. They didn't find it. One officer took my information and told me I should avoid driving alone for the rest of the night. I agreed. I called my brother and asked him to meet me at a town about 30 minutes away. The officer waited with me until my brother arrived. Nothing else happened. I eventually got home shortly after sunrise. For a while, I convinced myself the whole thing had been some misunderstanding. Then, about 2 weeks later, I received a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. When I did, there was a man on the other end. He asked if I had been driving through the mountains a couple of weeks earlier. I asked who he was. He said he worked for the highway department. He told me they had found an abandoned SUV in the woods not far from the road. I asked if it was the same SUV. He said they believed it was. I asked if they found the driver. He said no. Then he said something I still think about. They found the SUV sitting less than a mile from the gas station. The driver's seat was empty. The keys were still inside. The vehicle had no mechanical problems. There was plenty of gas. I asked him why someone would abandon a perfectly working vehicle. He didn't know. I asked if there were any fingerprints. He said there were. But none of them matched the registered owner. That confused me. He told me the SUV had been reported stolen months earlier. Then I asked him how long it had been sitting in the woods. He said that was the strange part. The tires had fresh mud on them. Like the vehicle had been driven there recently. I never found out who was driving it. I also never learned why the cashier seemed so familiar with the situation. I haven't gone back to that gas station. I don't even take that highway anymore unless I absolutely have to. But there's one part of that night that still bothers me more than anything else. About a month after it happened, I was going through the photos on my phone. I had taken a picture of the gas station that night. I didn't remember doing it. The picture was taken through my windshield while I was still sitting in my car. The gas station was visible in the distance. So was the road. And on the far side of the road was the SUV. It was parked there before I ever pulled into the station. I zoomed in. The driver's window was open. There was someone sitting inside. I couldn't see their face, but I could see one hand resting on the steering wheel, and the strangest part was the direction the vehicle was facing. It wasn't pointed toward the highway. It was pointed directly at me. I deleted the picture. I wish I hadn't. Because sometimes I still wonder if the SUV was actually following me that night, or if it had been waiting for me to come along in the first place. I was about halfway home when the radio started talking to me. Not literally at first. It was just static. I was driving through a part of the highway where I normally lost cell service, so I wasn't surprised when my music started cutting out. I reached over to change the station, but before I could, I heard a man's voice underneath the static. He said my name. I immediately turned the radio off. I sat there listening to the sound of my tires against the road. For a few seconds, I thought I had imagined it. Then the radio turned itself back on. and the same voice said, "Don't take the next exit." I pulled my hand away from the dashboard. I didn't touch anything. I had never experienced anything like that before. At the time, I was driving home from my parents' house. I had stayed for dinner and left much later than I originally planned. My parents lived in a rural area about 3 hours from my apartment, and most of the drive home was through small towns and long stretches of highway. I knew the route well. I had driven it dozens of times. It was around 1 in the morning when I reached the part of the highway where there were almost no businesses. I wasn't tired. I wasn't drinking. I wasn't using my phone. There was no reason for me to hallucinate a voice. Still, I tried to explain it away. Maybe a local radio station had somehow come through the static. Maybe I had misheard my own name. I turned the radio back on. Music was playing normally. I laughed to myself. Then I saw the exit sign. It was the next exit I normally took when I wanted to avoid construction closer to my apartment. I was about to move into the right lane when the radio suddenly cut out. Static filled the car. Then the voice returned. "Keep driving." I didn't move. The voice sounded like a man in his 40s or 50s. Calm, not angry. Almost like someone giving directions. I reached for the radio and turned it off again. This time, I left it off. I stayed in the left lane and passed the exit. I felt stupid doing it. There was no logical reason to listen to some random voice coming through my speakers. A few minutes later, I saw flashing lights behind me. At first, I thought it was a police officer. Then I realized it was an ambulance. It passed me at high speed. Another emergency vehicle followed, then another. I watched them disappear ahead. I remember thinking that maybe there had been an accident. About 10 minutes later, I saw traffic slowing down. Cars were stopped ahead. I couldn't see what had happened. Eventually, I reached the source. A tractor trailer had crossed the median and hit several vehicles. The highway was completely blocked. I sat there in traffic for almost an hour. When I finally got around the accident, I checked my phone. There was a message from my mom asking if I had made it home. I replied that I was still driving. Then I noticed something. The accident had happened exactly where the road from that exit would have merged back onto the highway. If I had taken the exit like I normally did, I would have been driving through that area at almost exactly the time the accident happened. I didn't know what to think. I told myself it was a coincidence. It had to be. I kept driving. For the next half hour, everything was normal. Then the radio turned on again. I hadn't touched it. Static filled the car. I reached for the power button. Before I could press it, the voice spoke. "You shouldn't have stopped." I froze. I looked around the highway. There were other cars nearby, but not many. I asked out loud, "Who is this?" The voice didn't answer. The radio returned to normal music. I turned it off. This time, I pulled into a well-lit gas station. I parked near the front entrance and went inside. I bought a coffee I didn't want just so I had a reason to stand there. The cashier was a young guy working alone. I asked him if there was something wrong with the local radio signal. He looked at me like I had asked a strange question. I explained that my radio had been picking up static. He said that sometimes happened in that area. I didn't mention the voice. I didn't want to sound crazy. I stayed inside for about 15 minutes. Then I went back to my car. The radio was still off. I started the engine. As soon as I pulled out of the parking lot, the radio came on. Static, then the voice. "Don't stop again." I slammed on the brakes. The car behind me honked. I pulled forward. I was starting to get genuinely scared. I turned the radio volume all the way down. The voice continued. "I could barely hear it. There's a blue truck behind you." I looked in my mirror. There was a blue pickup behind me. I immediately dismissed it. There were hundreds of blue trucks on the road. I changed lanes. The truck changed lanes. I slowed down. It slowed down. I started getting that same feeling I had earlier. The feeling that something was wrong, but I couldn't prove it. I took another exit. The blue truck took it too. I drove into a shopping center. The truck followed. I circled the parking lot and stopped near a 24-hour pharmacy. The truck drove past me. It didn't stop. I waited. Nothing. I felt relieved. Then my radio turned itself on. Static. The voice said, "He's not the one." I stared at the dashboard. "What do you mean?" No answer. The radio went silent. I sat there for several minutes. Eventually, I decided I was done driving. I went into the pharmacy and called my brother. He lived about 40 minutes away. I told him I was too tired to drive and asked if he could come get me. He agreed. While I waited, I sat inside the store near the front windows. I could see my car outside. About 10 minutes later, a man walked past the window. He was wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap. He stopped beside my car. I watched him look through the windows. Then he walked away. I immediately called my brother again. I told him someone was checking my car. He said he was almost there. The man came back. This time, he walked around the vehicle. He stopped at the driver's door. He tried the handle. My heart started pounding. The door was locked. He tried again. Then he looked directly through the glass. I stepped away from the window. The man stood there for several seconds. Then he walked away. My brother arrived about 5 minutes later. The man was gone. We checked my car. Nothing had been damaged. Nothing was missing. My brother asked me what had happened. I told him everything. He thought I had probably scared myself because of the radio incident. I agreed. I wanted to believe that. We drove home in his car. I left mine at the pharmacy. The next morning, I went back to get it. The car started normally. The radio was off. I drove home. I never told my parents what happened. I never told anyone at work. I eventually forgot about it. At least, I thought I did. Several months later, I was cleaning out my car. I found an old dash camera I had completely forgotten about. I had installed it for a road trip and never bothered removing it. I plugged the memory card into my computer. There were hours of recordings. Most of them were useless. Then I found the recording from that night. I watched the drive home. The audio was clear. I could hear myself talking. I could hear the music. Then I reached the part where the radio started playing static. I leaned closer to the screen. The voice came through. It wasn't distorted. It wasn't random noise. It was a man's voice. He said my name. Then he said, "Don't take the next exit." I paused the video. I listened again. The voice was real. That alone was enough to make me uncomfortable. But then I noticed something else. The dash camera had captured something I hadn't seen that night. A vehicle was following me. Not the blue truck. Another vehicle. It was an old dark sedan. It stayed several car lengths behind me for almost 20 minutes. I kept watching. Every time I changed lanes, it changed lanes. Every time I slowed down, it slowed down. When I pulled into the gas station, it didn't follow me inside. It continued down the highway. I thought that was strange. Then I watched the final part of the recording. After I left the gas station, the sedan appeared behind me again. The radio voice said, "Don't stop again." Then the sedan disappeared. I kept watching. A few minutes later, I saw something that made me stop the video completely. The sedan had pulled onto the shoulder ahead of me. Its headlights were off. As I drove past, the driver opened the door. But instead of getting out, he just stood there beside it, watching my car. I replayed the footage several times. Then I noticed something in the background. Far behind the sedan was another car, a police cruiser. It had pulled onto the shoulder too. The cruiser stayed there for several seconds. Then it drove away. I don't know why. I don't know who the man was. I don't know who was speaking through my radio. And I don't know how the voice knew what was happening ahead of me. The worst part came when I checked the timestamp. The radio warning about the exit had happened almost 4 minutes before I reached the exit. The accident happened later. So whoever was speaking couldn't have been warning me because they had seen the crash. They somehow knew it was going to happen. I still have the dash camera. I still have the recording. I've listened to it more times than I should admit. There's one thing I never noticed until recently. At the very end of the recording, after I had already pulled away from the pharmacy with my brother, the radio turns on again. My brother wasn't in my car. I was driving my car home alone. The voice speaks for only a few seconds. It says, "You can go home now." Then there's a pause, and a second voice quietly says, "Not yet. I haven't turned that radio on since." I knew I was in trouble when my GPS told me I had been driving on a road that didn't exist. The worst part was that I was looking directly at the road. It was around 2 in the morning, and I had been driving for almost 4 hours by myself. I was heading home after helping a friend move, and I had decided to take a shortcut through a rural part of the state instead of staying on the main highway. I had taken the same shortcut before. I knew where I was. At least I thought I did. The road was completely empty. There weren't any houses for miles, and the only lights came from my headlights. Every few minutes, I'd see a reflective road sign or a mailbox beside someone's driveway, but otherwise it was just trees. My GPS had been working normally until I passed a small town. Then it started recalculating. I wasn't concerned at first. It happens. But after a few seconds, the GPS told me to make a left turn onto a road called Miller Road. I looked ahead. There was a road, so I turned. It was a narrow paved road that immediately disappeared between the trees. The strange thing was that I didn't remember seeing it the last time I drove through there. Still, I trusted the GPS. I figured it was some county road I had simply forgotten about. After about 10 minutes, my phone lost service. That wasn't unusual either. I kept driving. The road became narrower. Then the pavement ended. I slowed down and looked at my GPS. It still showed the road continuing. I considered turning around. Instead, I kept going. I was already tired, and I didn't want to backtrack if the GPS knew another way around. A few minutes later, I noticed something strange. There were tire tracks in the dirt. Fresh ones. They were the same width as my tires and seemed to continue straight ahead. That actually made me feel better. If other people used this road, it couldn't be completely abandoned. I followed the tracks. Then I saw a house. It was sitting far back from the road. There were no lights on. No cars in the driveway. The house looked old enough that I couldn't tell if anyone lived there. As I passed it, I noticed someone standing on the front porch. I slowed down. It was a man. He wasn't waving. He wasn't doing anything. He was just watching me. I kept driving. A few seconds later, I looked in my rearview mirror. He was still standing there. I told myself he was probably just curious because nobody normally drove down that road at that hour. Then I noticed something that made me uncomfortable. There hadn't been a driveway leading to his house. The road simply passed in front of it. I continued driving. About 5 minutes later, I saw another house. Then another. All of them looked almost identical. Same dark siding. Same small porch. Same distance from the road. None had lights on. I started getting a weird feeling. I checked the GPS again. The road name had disappeared. Instead, the screen just showed a blue line continuing forward. I tapped the screen. Nothing happened. I tried zooming out. The map was blank. No roads, no towns, nothing. Just my location and the blue line. I stopped the car. For the first time that night, I was genuinely scared. I considered turning around. I looked behind me. The road was empty. I put the car into reverse. That's when I heard a knock. It came from the passenger side window. I nearly jumped out of my seat. There was nobody there. I looked around the car. Nothing. I locked the doors. Then I heard another knock, this time from the rear passenger window. I didn't look back. I started the car and drove. I wasn't thinking anymore about the GPS. I just wanted to get back to the main road. The road behind me seemed longer than it had been when I entered. I kept checking my mirrors. Nothing followed me. Then my headlights caught something in the middle of the road. It was a person. I slammed on the brakes. The person was standing directly in front of my car. It was the man from the first house. He was standing completely still. I locked the doors again, even though they were already locked. I reached for my phone. No service. I considered driving around him. There was barely enough room. I started moving forward slowly. The man didn't move. I stopped. He looked directly at me through the windshield. Then he raised one hand, not to wave. He pointed behind me. I looked in the rearview mirror. There was another person standing in the road behind my car. I turned around. The road was empty. I looked forward again. The man was gone. I immediately accelerated. I didn't care about the road anymore. I just wanted out. A few minutes later, I saw a sign. It was an actual road sign. It said, "Road closed." I almost laughed from relief. A closed road meant there had to be another way out. I stopped and looked around. There was a metal gate across the road, but there was a narrow opening beside it. My GPS showed the blue line continuing through. I drove around the gate. As soon as I passed it, my phone regained service. My GPS updated. I looked at the map. I wasn't on Miller Road. I wasn't even close to where I thought I was. According to the map, I was several miles away from any public road. The road I was on wasn't shown at all. I pulled over. I searched for the nearest police station. There was one about 20 minutes away. I decided to call. Before I could, a vehicle appeared behind me. It was an old pickup truck. Its headlights were off. It pulled up behind my car and stopped. I locked the doors. The driver didn't get out. I waited. Nothing happened. Then the truck flashed its headlights twice. I didn't know what that meant. I started the car. The truck started too. I drove. It followed. I called the police. This time the call connected. I told the dispatcher where I was. She asked me for the road name. I told her. There was a long pause. Then she asked me to repeat it. I did. She said, "There isn't a Miller Road there." I told her I was literally driving on it. She asked me if I could see any signs. I told her about the road closed sign. She said that was strange because the road I was describing had been closed for several years. I asked her why. She said there had been an accident there a long time ago. I asked what kind. She didn't give me details. She just told me to stay in my vehicle and keep driving toward the main highway. Then the call dropped. I kept going. The pickup was still behind me. Then it disappeared. I checked my mirrors. Nothing. I drove another few minutes. The road suddenly widened. I saw streetlights ahead. I almost cried from relief. I drove toward them. The trees ended. I was back in the town I had passed hours earlier. I pulled into a gas station and parked. I sat there for several minutes trying to understand what had happened. I checked my GPS. The route was completely normal again. There was no Miller Road. There wasn't even a road anywhere near where I had been driving. I went inside the gas station and asked the cashier if there was a road called Miller Road around there. He looked confused. He said no. I described the road. Then I mentioned the houses. His expression changed. He asked me what the houses looked like. I told him. He stared at me for several seconds. Then he said, "You need to go home." I asked why. He told me that there had been an old settlement in that area decades ago. Most of it had been abandoned. Then, years later, a road accident killed several people. The county eventually closed the road. The houses were torn down. I asked him when. He said it was before he was born. I told him I had just driven past them. He didn't answer. I went back to my car. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I called the county office. I wanted to know if there had ever been a Miller Road. There had, but it had been removed from the county road system years earlier. I asked if there were any houses still standing. They said no. I asked about the accident. They wouldn't give me much information. I eventually found an old newspaper article online. The accident had happened late at night. A car carrying several people had left the road and crashed into a tree. The driver survived. Everyone else died. The article said the victims had been traveling home from a wedding. There was one detail that bothered me. The accident had happened on the exact stretch of road where I had seen the houses. I didn't tell anyone about the people I saw. I didn't want them thinking I was crazy. For a while, I thought that was the end of it. Then, a few weeks later, I was cleaning my car. I found something underneath the passenger seat. It was a small piece of paper. I didn't recognize it. It looked like part of an old newspaper. There was a photograph printed on it. I stared at the picture for a long time. It showed a group of people standing outside a house. The house looked exactly like the ones I had passed that night. I turned the paper over. There was a handwritten sentence on the back. It said, "Thank you for stopping." I threw it away. I haven't taken that shortcut since. I don't even like driving rural roads alone anymore. But there is one thing I still can't explain. The morning after everything happened, I checked my car's mileage. I had driven almost 40 miles farther than the distance between the two towns. That didn't make sense. The road I remembered driving should have added maybe 10 miles to my trip, but my car said I had traveled much farther. And when I checked the gas gauge, I was almost empty. I had started that part of the drive with a nearly full tank. I still don't know where those extra miles went. I only know that if I ever see a road on my GPS that doesn't appear on the map again, I won't take it. Even if there's someone standing at the end of it, pointing me forward. I've worked the night shift at gas stations for most of my adult life, and if there's one thing that job teaches you, it's that the people who stop at a gas station at 3 in the morning are either running from something or running towards something, and you can usually tell which just by watching how they walk from their car to the door. I don't work the station where this happened anymore. I put in for a transfer about 2 months after this, and I never gave my manager a real reason why. It was a Tuesday, which I remember specifically because Tuesdays were always dead. I was closing out the register around 2:40 in the morning when a car pulled up to pump number 3, and I watched a woman get out, mid-30s maybe, wearing what looked like pajama pants and a zip-up hoodie, the kind of outfit that told me she probably wasn't planning on being out this late when her night started. She didn't come inside right away. She just stood by her car, pumping gas, looking around the lot like she was waiting for something. I didn't think much of it until she finally came inside about 10 minutes later to pay, and the first thing she said to me, before even a hello, was, "Is there anyone else here right now?" Like, in the store or outside? I told her it was just me. She asked if I'd noticed another car in the lot in the last half hour, one that wasn't hers. I told her I hadn't, but I also mentioned that I'd been in the back doing inventory for part of that time, so I couldn't say for certain. That answer didn't seem to make her feel any better. She paid for her gas and asked if she could use the bathroom before she got back on the road. I pointed her toward it, the same way I did for probably 15 customers a night, and didn't think much else of it. She was in there a long time, longer than felt normal, and I remember glancing at the clock a couple times, doing that mental math you do when you're bored at a register, calculating how long is too long before it's actually your business to check on someone. When she came back out, she looked different. Paler maybe, or just more rattled than when she'd walked in. She asked me, very quietly, if I'd heard anything from the bathroom while she was in there. I told her I hadn't heard anything at all, which was true, but the way she asked it made my skin crawl a little. I asked what she meant, and she just shook her head and said it was probably nothing, that she was tired and driving too long without sleep does weird things to your head. She left after that, got in her car, and pulled out of the lot. I watched her taillights disappear down the road and went back to closing out my register, trying to shake off the strange feeling she'd left behind. About 20 minutes later, another car pulled into the lot, and a man got out, walked up to the door, and just stood there for a second before coming inside, which struck me as odd right away. Most people walk straight in. He looked around the store first, slow, like he was checking something off a list in his head before he even grabbed anything. He came up to the counter without buying gas, which was strange for a gas station, and asked me if a woman had come through recently, described her almost exactly, the pajama pants, the hoodie, even her approximate height. I told him I wasn't really allowed to give out information about other customers, which is a policy I made up on the spot because something about him asking felt very wrong. He didn't push it. He just nodded, thanked me, and walked back out to his car, except he didn't drive away. He sat in the parking lot with his headlights off for almost 15 minutes, and I watched him the entire time through the window, my hand hovering near the phone under the counter that I'd use to call the cops if I needed to. Eventually he pulled out, and I let myself breathe again, thinking that, whatever that was, it was over. I finished closing, grabbed my bag, and headed out to my own car, which was parked around the side of the building where the employees always parked. When I got to my car, there was a piece of paper tucked under my windshield wiper. I almost ignored it, figuring it was some flyer or advertisement, but something made me pull it out and look at it before I got in the car. It was a gas station receipt, the same kind we printed inside, time-stamped from about 40 minutes earlier. It was the woman's receipt, the one from pump number 3. Written on the back of it, in pen, were the words, "He followed me from the last one too. Please don't tell him which way I went." I stood there in the dark parking lot holding that receipt for a long time, trying to figure out when she could have possibly put it on my car, since I hadn't seen her come back, and I definitely hadn't left my register unattended long enough for her to sneak around back without me noticing. I called the police that night and gave them the receipt, told them everything I remembered about both the woman and the man, but there wasn't much they could do without a crime actually being reported by either of them. I never found out what happened to her. I checked local news for weeks afterward, half expecting to see something, and nothing ever came up, which I've never decided if that's good news or just means nobody ever found anything to report. I put in for that transfer not long after, and I still have that receipt folded up in a drawer at home because throwing it away felt like giving up on ever getting an answer, even though I know I probably never will. The man in the other car had been driving beside me for almost 20 minutes, but I didn't realize he wasn't actually passing me until I saw him sitting in the passenger seat. That was the moment I knew something was seriously wrong. I was driving home alone after visiting a friend who lived several hours away. It was late on a Sunday night, and I had work early the next morning, so I wanted to get home as quickly as possible. Most of the drive was completely uneventful. I was on a 4-lane highway with very little traffic. There were long stretches where I could see only a few sets of headlights ahead of me. About an hour into the drive, a silver sedan pulled up beside me. I barely noticed it. The driver was going slightly faster than me, but instead of passing, he stayed beside my car. I assumed he was distracted or talking to someone. After a minute or two, I slowed down. The sedan slowed down too. I sped up. It sped up. I looked over. The driver's window was slightly lowered, but I couldn't see his face clearly. I thought maybe he was trying to get my attention. I ignored him. Eventually, I changed lanes. The sedan changed lanes too. I started getting uncomfortable. I looked at my phone. I had plenty of gas. My car was running perfectly, and I wasn't anywhere near an isolated road yet. There was no reason to panic, so I kept driving. The sedan remained beside me. Then I noticed something strange. There was nobody in the passenger seat. I could clearly see the empty seat. I thought maybe I was imagining it because the inside of the car was dark. Then the sedan moved slightly ahead of me. The driver turned his head. I saw his face for maybe 2 seconds. He was looking directly at me. Then he smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It looked more like he was checking whether I had noticed him. I immediately looked forward. I decided I was going to get off at the next exit. There was a large shopping center a few miles ahead, and I figured I could pull into a parking lot and let him drive away. I changed lanes. The sedan followed. I changed lanes again. It followed again. At that point, I was certain. He was following me. I took the exit. The sedan took it too. I drove toward the shopping center. The entire time, I kept checking my mirrors. The sedan was still there. I pulled into the parking lot of a grocery store. There were still a few cars parked outside. I drove slowly through the lot and stopped near the front entrance. The sedan drove past me. I watched it disappear. I waited. Nothing happened. I started feeling embarrassed. Maybe I had overreacted. I stayed parked for a few minutes. Then I saw the silver sedan parked at the opposite end of the lot. I couldn't believe it. It had somehow gotten around me. I decided I was leaving. I pulled out of the parking lot and headed back toward the highway. The sedan followed. I called my brother. I told him someone was following me and asked him to stay on the phone. He immediately took me seriously. He told me to drive to a police station. I looked at my GPS. There was one about 15 minutes away. I headed there. The sedan stayed behind me. My brother kept talking to me, trying to keep me calm. Then the sedan suddenly pulled alongside me again. I looked over. The driver was staring directly at me. Then he raised his hand. He pointed toward the shoulder. I shook my head. He pointed again. I ignored him. Then he rolled his window down. I could hear him shouting something, but I couldn't understand the words. I looked forward. I didn't want to interact with him. A few seconds later, he fell behind me. I thought that was the end of it. Then I noticed something in my rearview mirror. The sedan's headlights had turned off. It was still moving. I could barely see it behind me. I told my brother. He told me not to stop. I didn't. I kept driving toward the police station. Then something happened that still bothers me. The sedan disappeared. I looked in every mirror. Nothing. I checked the side roads. Nothing. I started thinking maybe he had finally given up. Then I saw the police station ahead. I pulled into the parking lot. I parked directly in front of the building. My brother was still on the phone. I told him I was safe. I was about to get out when I noticed the silver sedan parked across the street. My stomach dropped. The driver wasn't inside. I watched the car for several seconds. Then the driver's door opened. Nobody got out. The door simply opened. I stared at it. A few seconds later, the door closed. I didn't understand what I was seeing. I told my brother I was going inside. I got out and ran toward the police station. A police officer opened the door for me. I explained everything. He asked me where the sedan was. I pointed across the street. He looked. The car was gone. He asked if I knew the license plate. I didn't. I gave him the best description I could. He told me they would check the surrounding roads. I stayed inside for about 20 minutes. Nobody found the car. Eventually, I felt safe enough to leave. I called my brother again. He stayed on the phone while I drove. The rest of the trip was normal. I got home just before sunrise. I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about the man, especially the way he had smiled at me. The next morning, I called the police station. I wanted to know if they had found anything. The officer I spoke with said they had found a silver sedan abandoned about 10 miles from the station. I asked if it was the same one. He said the description matched. I asked if they had found the driver. He said no. Then he asked me something strange. He asked if I had ever seen the driver before. I said no. He told me they had recovered the vehicle and were trying to identify the owner. I asked if there was anything unusual inside. He hesitated. Then he said they had found a phone. The phone was still turned on. I asked if they could tell who it belonged to. He said they were working on it. I didn't think much about it. A few days later, the officer called me again. He said they had checked the phone. There were several videos stored on it. I asked what kind of videos. He wouldn't tell me everything. But he said some appeared to show different vehicles traveling at night. I asked why someone would record that. He said they didn't know. Then he asked me to come to the station. I went. The officer showed me one of the videos. It was taken from inside the silver sedan. The camera was pointed through the windshield. It showed a dark highway. Then my car appeared in front of it. I recognized my car immediately. I asked when the video had been recorded. The officer told me it was from that same night. I watched myself driving. The camera followed my car for several miles. Then the video ended. There were several other videos, different cars, different nights, different roads. It looked like the person had been following strangers for a long time. The officer told me they were trying to determine who owned the phone. Then he showed me something else, a photograph. It was a picture of my car, taken from the silver sedan. The picture had been taken earlier that night. I asked when. He told me the timestamp was before I had even reached the highway. That didn't make sense. I asked him how that was possible. He said they didn't know. Then he zoomed in on the photograph. My car was parked at a gas station. I recognized it. It was the gas station I had stopped at earlier that evening. I had gone inside for a drink. I hadn't noticed the silver sedan. But apparently it had been there. The photograph had been taken while I was inside. The officer told me they believed the person had seen me there and followed me afterward. That explanation made sense. It was terrifying, but it made sense. I asked what happened to the driver. They never found him. The sedan had been stolen. The phone had no registered owner. There were no useful fingerprints. The police eventually stopped contacting me. I tried to move on. For the most part, I did, but I became extremely aware of other cars whenever I drove at night. If someone stayed beside me too long, I would change lanes. If they followed, I would go somewhere public. I never wanted to feel trapped like that again. Then, about 6 months later, something happened that brought the whole thing back. I was driving home from work. It was still daylight. I stopped at a gas station near my apartment. While I was pumping gas, I noticed a silver sedan parked near the air pump. It looked almost identical to the one from that night. I stood there staring at it. The driver wasn't inside. I told myself it was just another silver sedan. There are millions of them. I finished pumping gas. I got into my car. As I pulled away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The silver sedan pulled out behind me. I immediately felt sick. I changed lanes. It changed lanes. I slowed down. It slowed down. I drove into a crowded shopping center. It followed. I parked near the entrance. The sedan drove past. I sat there watching it. Then I noticed something. The driver wasn't the man from before. It was a woman. She looked completely normal. She was probably in her 30s. She drove past without even looking at me. I felt ridiculous. I waited until she left. Then I went home. For several days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Eventually, I convinced myself it had been another coincidence. Then I received a message from an unknown number. There was no greeting, no explanation, just one sentence. You shouldn't have looked in the passenger seat. I stared at it for a long time. I never responded. I blocked the number. I changed my phone number. I even told my brother what happened. He thought someone might have gotten my information from the police report. That was possible. I tried to believe it. A few weeks later, the police contacted me again. The officer told me they had finally identified the man connected to the silver sedan. He had been arrested in another state. I asked if he had sent me the message. The officer said no. He had been in custody before the message was sent. I asked him if they had found anything else. He said there was one thing. When they searched the man's belongings, they found a notebook. Inside were descriptions of several people he had followed. The officer said my name wasn't written anywhere. My address wasn't either. I felt relieved. Then he told me they found a photograph. It was a photograph of me, not my car. Me. I asked where it had been taken. He said they couldn't determine exactly, but the photograph had been taken from inside another vehicle. I asked if it was the silver sedan. He said no. It was from a different car. I didn't know what to say. The officer apologized. He said they were still investigating. That was the last conversation I ever had with him. I still think about that night sometimes, especially when I'm driving alone. I don't know who was in that other vehicle. I don't know how long they had been watching me, and I don't know why the man pointed toward the shoulder that night. But there is one thing I wish I had done differently. When he was driving beside me, I should have looked at the passenger seat more carefully. Because when I finally noticed someone sitting there, the person wasn't the man who had been driving. It was a woman. And she had been looking at me the entire time. I just couldn't see her face until she leaned forward. That was the moment I realized there had been two people in the car the entire time, and I still don't know which one of them had actually been following me. My brother-in-law, Paul, has always been the type of person who thinks rules are more like suggestions, which has caused more than a few problems over the years. But this is the first time it actually scared both of us instead of just annoying me. I'm telling this one because Paul still refuses to talk about it, and somebody in the family should have it written down somewhere, even if it's just for my own sanity. We were driving back from a bachelor party for one of his college friends, held way out in this rural area about 3 hours from where either of us lives. The kind of trip that only made sense because the friend's family owned a cabin out there and offered it up for free. I don't drink much, so I volunteered to be the one driving us both home, since Paul had made it his personal mission that weekend to not remember most of it. We left around 11 at night, later than I wanted, but the party ran long and Paul insisted he was fine to leave, even though I could tell he was still pretty out of it in the passenger seat, head against the window, occasionally mumbling something about how good of a time he'd had. I didn't mind driving. I actually don't mind night drives most of the time. There's something calming about empty roads when you're not the one who has to worry about staying awake through a hangover. About an hour and a half into the drive, we hit a detour. There was a sign, official looking enough, orange and reflective, saying the road ahead was closed for construction, with an arrow pointing us onto a side road I didn't recognize. I remember being a little annoyed since our GPS hadn't mentioned anything about construction, but I figured maybe it just hadn't updated yet, which happens all the time out in areas like that where cell service is spotty and map data lags behind. I took the detour. Paul stirred a little in his seat and asked where we were going, and I told him the main road was closed. We were taking a different way. He mumbled something that might have been agreement and went back to resting his head against the window. The side road was narrow, no lines painted down the middle, trees close on both sides, the kind of road that made me grip the wheel a little tighter just because of how easy it would be to drift off it in the dark. I kept expecting it to loop back toward the highway, the way detours usually do, but it just kept going, further than felt right for a simple construction bypass. About 20 minutes into the detour, without ever having merged back onto anything resembling a main road, I saw lights up ahead. At first I thought, good, this must be where it reconnects, some kind of checkpoint directing traffic back onto the highway. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't a construction checkpoint at all. It was a group of people standing in the road, maybe 5 or 6 of them, with 2 vehicles parked at angles behind them, effectively blocking both lanes. I slowed down, obviously, because you don't just drive through a group of people standing in the road, no matter how uneasy it makes you feel. As I got closer, I could see they were wearing normal clothes, nothing uniformed, nothing that looked official at all, no reflective vests, no flashlights being waved the way actual road crews use them. Just a group of people standing there, watching my headlights approach. I stopped the car about 30 feet back from them, engine running, and Paul, to his credit, seemed to sober up almost instantly, sitting up straight and squinting through the windshield. "That's not construction," he said, which was exactly what I was thinking, but hadn't wanted to say out loud yet. One of the men from the group started walking toward the car, slow, unbothered, the way you'd walk toward something you weren't worried about at all. I rolled my window down about 2 inches, just enough to talk without fully exposing myself, and he stopped a few feet from the car. "Road's closed up ahead," he said. "You'll need to turn around." I told him the sign back a ways had directed us onto this road specifically because of construction, and asked where we were supposed to go instead, since this road clearly wasn't leading back to the highway. He just shrugged and said, "Not sure." Wasn't us that put the sign up. That answer didn't sit right with me at all. If it wasn't them, and it wasn't an actual construction crew, then somebody had put up a fake detour sign specifically to funnel drivers down this road toward this exact spot, for reasons I did not want to think about too hard while sitting there in the dark with the engine idling. "We're just going to turn around then," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, and started to roll my window back up. The man put his hand out, not touching the car, but close enough that it felt like a warning. "Wouldn't recommend going back that way either," he said. "There's a washout about a mile back. Road's not stable. You'd want to keep going forward. Take the fork up ahead. That'll get you back around." Paul leaned over toward my side of the car, keeping his voice low. "Don't listen to him. Just turn around." I agreed with him completely, but something about the way the group behind the man was standing made me hesitate before actually doing it. They weren't moving, weren't talking amongst themselves, just standing there in a loose line, watching the car, watching us, with impatience that felt deeply wrong for the situation. Normal people, if their road actually was closed for a legitimate reason, would usually be a little more animated, a little more willing to explain, maybe annoyed at having to repeat themselves to yet another confused driver. This felt rehearsed. It felt like a performance for an audience of exactly 2 people. I decided I didn't care what he recommended. I threw the car into reverse and started backing up slowly, watching him carefully through the windshield the entire time. He didn't move to stop me, didn't call out, just stood there watching with the same flat expression. And behind him, the group didn't shift at all, like they'd already known this was going to be my choice. I got us turned around within about 30 seconds and started driving back the way we'd come, faster than I probably should have on a road that narrow and unfamiliar. Paul kept twisting around in his seat, checking behind us. "They're not following," he said after a minute, and I let myself breathe a little easier, though my hands were still shaking slightly on the wheel. We drove for maybe 5 more minutes before I saw something that made my stomach drop. Up ahead, in almost the exact spot the man had claimed there was a washed-out section of road, there was, in fact, damage to the pavement. Not catastrophic, not impassable, the way he'd implied, but a section where the asphalt had crumbled along the shoulder, cones set up around it, the kind of legitimate, small-scale road damage you see all the time in rural areas that don't get proper maintenance funding. He wasn't lying about that part, Paul said quietly, and I didn't like how that made me feel, because if that detail was true, it made me wonder what else might have been true, and what part exactly they'd been lying about. I slowed down, navigated carefully around the damaged section, which was easily passable if you paid attention, nothing that should have required an entire detour or a group of people blocking a different road. Once we were past it, I sped back up, watching my rearview mirror obsessively for headlights that never came. We eventually found our way back to a road I recognized, after about 15 more minutes of tense, mostly silent driving, both of us checking every side road and every set of headlights that appeared in the distance like it might be that same group, somehow having gotten ahead of us. Paul pulled out his phone and tried to find any information about construction or road closures in that area, and found absolutely nothing, no official notices, no news, nothing that would explain a legitimate detour sign being posted on that stretch of highway. We made it home a little over 2 hours later than we should have, both of us far more sober and far more rattled than either of us wanted to admit to each other in the moment. Paul fell asleep almost the second he got inside, but I stayed up for a long time that night, sitting at my kitchen table, trying to make sense of what we'd actually witnessed. I called the county highway department the next day, gave them the approximate location and description of the detour sign, and asked if they had any record of construction work being scheduled for that stretch of road. The woman I spoke with checked and told me there was nothing on file, no scheduled work, nothing that would explain a sign like that being posted. She said sometimes people put up unauthorized signs as pranks, or, and she paused a little before saying this next part, sometimes for reasons that weren't pranks at all. Paul and I have talked about it maybe twice since it happened, both times briefly, both times ending the conversation faster than either of us wanted to admit. Neither of us has driven that route again, even though it used to be our default way to that cabin. And neither of us has any interest in finding out what would have happened if we'd taken that fork the man told us to take, the one that supposedly led back around to safety. I still think about that group standing in the road sometimes, how still they were, how patient, like they'd done this before and knew exactly how these things tend to go. I don't know what they wanted from us. I don't know how many other cars might have taken that fork instead of turning around the way we did. I just know I'm grateful, more grateful than I can really put into words, that Paul woke up when he did, and that something in both of us said no before we had the chance to find out. The first thing I noticed was the man standing in the middle of the highway. I was doing about 70 miles an hour when my headlights caught him. He was just standing there. No car. No flashlight. No warning triangle. Nothing. I hit the brakes so hard that everything in my car slid forward, and my tires started screaming against the pavement. The man didn't move. At the last second, I swerved into the other lane. I passed within a few feet of him, and as I looked through the passenger window, I realized he wasn't looking at the road. He was looking directly at me. I checked my rearview mirror. He was gone. I couldn't see him anywhere behind me. I slowed down to about 40 and kept driving. This happened last winter when I was driving home from a work trip. I had spent most of the day in another city and didn't leave until late that evening. Normally, I would have gotten a hotel, but I had an important meeting the next morning and wanted to sleep in my own bed. The drive was supposed to take a little over 3 hours. The first 2 were completely normal. There was traffic near the city, then less and less as I got farther away. Eventually, I was on a highway surrounded by woods. It was after midnight. There were no streetlights. Every few miles, I'd pass an exit, but most of them led to small roads and towns I had never heard of. I wasn't tired enough to worry about falling asleep, but I was definitely ready to be home. That's when I saw the man. After passing him, I kept checking my mirrors. Nothing. I turned the radio down because I wanted to hear what was happening around me. The highway was completely quiet. A few minutes later, I saw headlights in the distance. A car was coming up behind me. I relaxed a little. At least I wasn't completely alone anymore. The car got closer. It was a dark-colored sedan. It stayed behind me for maybe 5 minutes. Then it moved into the left lane and passed. I looked over as it went by. The driver was a man. He didn't look at me. The sedan disappeared ahead. I kept driving. About 10 minutes later, I saw the same sedan pulled over on the shoulder. Its hazard lights were flashing. I slowed down as I passed. The driver's door was open. There was nobody standing beside it. I looked in the rearview mirror. The door was still open. I thought about stopping. Then I remembered the man in the road. Something about the whole situation felt wrong. I kept going. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. It was a notification from my navigation app. It said there was an accident ahead and suggested I take the next exit. I didn't think much of it. There was another exit about 2 miles away. I stayed on the highway. Then my phone buzzed again. Another notification. Same thing. Accident ahead. Take the next exit. I looked at the road ahead. Nothing. No brake lights. No emergency vehicles. No traffic. I decided to ignore it. A few minutes later, I saw a sign for the next exit. As I approached it, I noticed something strange. There was a police cruiser parked on the shoulder. Its lights were off. The officer was sitting inside. I slowed down. The cruiser pulled onto the highway behind me. I watched it in my mirror. It followed me for maybe a mile. Then it turned on its lights. I immediately pulled over. The cruiser stopped behind me. I rolled down my window. The officer walked up. He was older, probably in his 50s. He shined his flashlight toward the inside of my car. Then he asked, "You alone?" I said yes. He looked behind me. Then he looked at me again. "Where are you coming from?" I told him. "Where are you headed?" I told him that too. He asked if I had seen anyone walking along the highway. I hesitated. Then I told him about the man. His expression changed. "Where?" I described the location as best as I could. He asked me what the man was wearing. I said I thought it was a dark jacket and jeans. The officer stared at me for a second. Then he asked, "Did he look injured?" I said I didn't think so. He nodded. Then he told me something that made me uncomfortable. "Don't stop for anyone on this road." I asked why. He said there had been several calls that night about a pedestrian walking along the highway. I asked if it was the same man. He said they weren't sure. Then he told me to stay on the highway and drive straight to the next town. I thanked him. Before walking away, he leaned down toward the window. "Don't take the next exit." I asked why. He said, "Just don't." Then he walked back to his cruiser. I waited until he pulled away. For the next few minutes, I kept thinking about what he had said. I didn't understand why I wasn't supposed to take the exit. I also didn't understand why he seemed so serious. My navigation app continued telling me to take that same exit. I ignored it. Then the road ahead started getting foggy. It wasn't thick enough to make driving dangerous, but visibility dropped quickly. I slowed down. The highway became completely empty again. No cars ahead, no cars behind me. Then I saw headlights. They were far behind me. I assumed it was the police cruiser. The lights got closer. I checked my mirror. It was the dark sedan. The same one I'd passed earlier. My stomach tightened. I sped up. The sedan sped up too. I moved into the right lane. It stayed behind me. I slowed down. It slowed down. I knew what I was going to do. I was going to take the next exit anyway. There was no way I was going to keep driving with that car behind me. The exit appeared. I moved into the right lane. The sedan followed. I took the exit. The sedan took it too. The road immediately became narrow. There were no businesses. No houses. Just trees. My navigation app told me to continue for another 7 miles. I started regretting the decision immediately. The sedan was still behind me. I looked for somewhere to turn around. There was nothing. Then I saw something ahead. A small gas station. There were 2 pumps outside and a single building with 1 light on. I pulled in. The sedan drove past. I watched it continue down the road. I parked near the front entrance. For a few seconds, I just sat there. Then I noticed something. The sedan had stopped about 100 yards away. Its brake lights were on. It was waiting. I grabbed my phone and went inside. There was one employee behind the counter. He looked at me and said, "You okay?" I said I was fine. I bought a bottle of water. Then I asked him if there was another way back to the highway. He said there was a road behind the station. I asked if it connected to the next town. He shook his head. Not anymore. I asked what he meant. He said the road had been closed years ago. I thanked him. I was about to leave when he asked, "Is that car yours?" I looked outside. The sedan was still there. I said no. He stared at it. Then he said, "You should probably stay inside." I asked why. He didn't answer. Instead, he locked the front door. That immediately scared me. I asked what was going on. He said, "We've had problems here before." I asked what kind of problems. He looked through the window again. The sedan was gone. He unlocked the door. I stepped outside. The parking lot was empty. The employee stood in the doorway. I walked toward my car. Then I heard an engine behind the building. I turned. The sedan came around the corner. It drove directly toward me. I ran back toward the store. The employee pulled me inside and locked the door. The sedan stopped outside. The driver stayed inside. We watched through the window. The man behind the wheel looked familiar. It was the same man who had passed me earlier. He was staring toward the store. Then he got out. He walked toward the entrance. I moved away from the window. The employee told me to stay in the back. The man reached the door. He tried the handle. Locked. He knocked. Once. Then twice. Then 3 times. The employee didn't move. The man leaned toward the glass. He looked inside. Then he smiled. I knew that smile. It was the same expression the man in the highway had given me. Except I hadn't been able to see his face clearly when I passed him. The man outside suddenly walked away. He got back into the sedan. Then he drove off. I called the police. The dispatcher asked where I was. I gave her the address. She told me officers were on the way. I waited. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. No police. I called again. The dispatcher told me there had been some confusion with the location. She asked me to describe the gas station. I did. She said there wasn't supposed to be a gas station at that location. I thought she had misunderstood me. I gave her the address again. She repeated it back. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. "Sir, that address is on a closed section of road." I looked at the employee. He was staring at me. I asked him what the station's address was. He didn't answer. I asked again. He finally said, "You shouldn't be here." Then all the lights went out. The entire building went black. I heard the front door unlock. I heard the handle move. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The employee was gone. I called out for him. No answer. I could hear footsteps somewhere behind the counter. Slow footsteps. I backed toward the wall. Then my phone rang. It was the police. I answered immediately. The dispatcher asked me where I was. I gave her the address again. She said, "Stay in your vehicle." I told her I was inside a gas station. She went silent. Then she asked, "What gas station?" I described it. She said, "There hasn't been a gas station there in over 10 years. I didn't understand. I told her I was standing inside one. She told me to get into my car and drive. I asked where. She said, "Anywhere that's lit." The line went dead. I ran outside. The parking lot was empty. My car was still there. The sedan was gone. I got inside, locked the doors, and started the engine. I didn't look back. I drove until I reached the highway. When I got there, the fog had disappeared. There were other cars, streetlights, businesses. Everything looked normal. I drove home without stopping. The next morning, I called the local police department. I told them what happened. They checked the address. There was an old gas station at that location. It had closed more than a decade earlier after an employee was killed during a robbery. I asked if the employee had ever been identified. The officer said yes. He gave me the man's name. I searched for it online. There was an old newspaper photograph. I recognized him immediately. He was the man who had been working behind the counter. The same man who had locked the door. The same man who had told me I shouldn't be there. I told the officer about the sedan. He said a vehicle matching that description had been involved in several incidents in the area over the years, but there was no current registration. No owner, nothing. I never got a good explanation for what happened. I still drive that highway sometimes. But I never take that exit, and I never stop for anyone on the shoulder. A few months ago, I was driving through that area during the day. I decided to look for the gas station. I wanted to prove to myself that I'd gotten confused that night. The exit was there. I took it. The road was completely different. There were trees where I remembered the station being. No building. No pumps. Nothing. I drove another mile and turned around. As I passed the spot again, I noticed something beside the road. A small memorial. There were flowers around it. I pulled over. There was a photograph attached to the post. It was the employee from the gas station. Underneath the photograph was a date. And a short message. I won't repeat the message, because the part that scared me wasn't what it said. It was the photograph beneath it. There was another picture. A man standing beside a dark sedan. It was the same sedan that had followed me, and standing beside the driver's door was the man I had seen on the highway. The picture had been taken years before I ever drove that road. I got back in my car. I didn't stop again, but when I reached the highway, my phone buzzed. I looked down. My navigation app had opened by itself. There was a route already selected. It was taking me back to that same exit. I closed the app. A few seconds later, it opened again. The route was still there, and underneath it was a message I had never seen before. Turn around. I deleted the app that night. I haven't installed another navigation app since. Because every once in a while, when I'm driving alone after midnight, my phone screen lights up by itself. And for just a second, I can see that same route. Always leading back to the road I was never supposed to take.